Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Mark Henry, and this is another Opmantek Network Management IT Audit Software weekly webinar. Today we're going to be talking about deploying performance management solutions at scale for service providers and telcos. Just to get everyone in line with a little bit of light housekeeping, all the attendees, you're going to be on mute during the presentation. If you have a question, please use the GoToMeetings chat window. We'll be keeping an eye on it throughout the session. We will have a dedicated Q&A period at the end of the session where you can ask any questions you want. We'll take everyone's mics off mute, and we can go through and answer any questions, do any demos, walk you through anything you'd like to take a look at. Just as a heads up, this session will be recorded and made available to all attendees as well. We will be stopping the recording before we open the Q&A session. So if you're a little shy and you want to ask questions at the end, just be advised we won't be recording that session at all. So topics for today. Today we're going to cover four main concept areas. The first is how to develop a service catalog with achievable service level agreements. The second is architecting a solution for scalability and dependable deployment. The third piece is how do you handle overlapping IP addresses multi-tenancy, and that'll be a combination of NMIS and OPHA. And we're going to talk about how to consolidate your solutions into a single pane of glass. So on that note, let's get started. So taking a look at the ITIL version 3, specifically IT Service Management Maturity Model. Today's sessions really speak toward moving you out of a level 0 or a level of an entry-level level 1 IT service group and moving you directly into a level 2 and heading towards into a level 3 service group. So developing a service catalog with achievable service level agreements. So the first question is, what services and SLAs will your strategic NOC offer? And we use the term strategic network operations center or strategic NOC very, very specifically here. It's the concept that it is a very, very proactive team which is dedicated to network, server, and application monitoring. And with that in mind, the concept here is that rather than focusing on monitoring just the performance of the underlying devices, you instead come from a top-down business standpoint where you're monitoring applications and the performance of applications across your system. And that's all built up from the concept of devices, services, synthetic transactions, availability, and then rolled into a much larger concept of the application monitoring. So we recommend, if you're looking at developing a service catalog for your organization, that you start with at least a kind of a 2-tiered model, but we recommend a 3-tiered system of bronze, silver, and gold. And of course, you can name these whatever you want. But at the bronze level, the concept is you'd be monitoring the underlying equipment and services required for applications. So for example, if a service requires MySQL, SQL Server, Java Virtual Machine, etc., you'd be monitoring those services running on the servers, and you'd be monitoring the underlying equipment, the switches that provide interconnectivity to the servers, the routers that connect upwards, the front-end load balancers, whatever firewalls that specifically support those applications. At the next level up, at the silver level, it would include everything from bronze, plus custom automated responses to defined faults. So Opmantek's OP Events module allows you to create automated actions in response to events or faults that occur within the system. So for example, if a service trips off, the response to that might be restarting the service. If a server is experiencing continued high memory usage in response to a specific service, if restarting the service doesn't clear the high memory, perhaps rebooting the server is the right activity. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it might be an option. You'd want to look and see what are the activities that your engineering team take normally in response to specific events or faults that occur with applications, and then mimic those in the event response. The third tier to application monitoring would be a gold level, and that would be everything under silver, which of course includes bronze, and adds in synthetic transactions and deployed user experience monitors. So it's the concept where you might script the login to a website. You'd measure how long it takes to load the web page, to log in, to load the page after the login, and you might even try to execute some kind of a transaction on that page. We ship with several different examples of this. One is loading the OMK test page from our Opmantek system. And the concept with that is when you load that OMK test page, it also runs a test of the database and returns the result of that test. And so you can actually load that one web page, search for that test results, and if the test result is correct, then the page passes. And if it's anything other than what you expect, which is all databases okay, then you could mark that as a failure and raise an event or an alarm. Beyond application monitoring, your service catalog could include performance trending. This, of course, would require Opmantek's OP Trend module. The concept here is you'd be trending the underlying equipment to understand the user experience impact and investment needs. So how well are your devices working, not only on a specific monthly or weekly basis, but day by day, hour by hour. So over the next 26 weeks, we're going to look at Tuesday, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and see for every Tuesday over the past 26 weeks, how has every single parameter of this device fared, and then create a window of normal operation or a standard deviation window of normal operation. And then as long as operation falls within that upper and lower tier, the device is working normally. If it goes above or below that, you can, of course, raise events for it. The third thing that you should offer as part of your service catalog is self-service. The concept that your client, whether that's an internal client, a department, a business unit, if you're a managed service provider, your outside clients, your external clients as well, giving them the opportunity to log into some kind of a customer portal and see what their application performance is. Pardon me. In addition to maybe creating dashboards for application performance, you could also provide them dashboards and charts for their internet service provider, for their internet links. Are their ISPs meeting their SLAs to that client, etc. Once you determine what things you're going to offer, you need to talk about what service level you're going to try to support. And that really comes down to what are you staffed for? If you're a 9 to 5 business hours department with an on-call engineer, do you really want to sell 24/7 support with a guaranteed response time? Generally speaking, the answer to that is no. You really only want to do a 24/7 opportunity if you're going to manage a 24/7 NOC offering with live, awake, on-staff personnel. But things that you want to ask yourself are, how much downtime can your customer or the line of business absorb on a daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis? Next thing you want to touch base on is what can you do with the network application downtime? How does that affect business income? If you have a group that has a high-profile application, has to be up 24/7, and for every 1 hour of downtime, it costs $500,000 of impact. That's huge. That's absolutely huge, and it's completely critical to the business to get their arms around that. And just looking at what would happen for an hour of downtime during off hours could absolutely help fund a 24/7 NOC team. The next thing you want to look at is fault problem response time. What's your first touch to resolution? What is it your clients want? And generally speaking, most clients want instantaneous or within 10 or 15 minutes for a first touch. Again, understanding what can your team actually support. Trying to have someone on call at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, on a football weekend, can be very, very difficult and may not be realistic. You may not be able to meet that 15-minute window. So understanding maybe you have different times for different maximum response times for after hours, weekends, holidays than you would during Monday through Friday business hours. So coming up with what you can support, and then also understanding how that can really drive your downtime. What does that cost to you? There's a little chart at the top of this page that goes over the different SLA kind of percentages from 97 up to 99.99. And what that translates to, if your business is running 24/7, 365, how many minutes per month or hours per year of downtime does each of those SLA levels kind of equate to? And it can be an eye-opener how much of a difference between 97 and 99.99. When you're at 99.99% uptime, so if you're guaranteeing that your equipment will be up to support that application 99.99% of the time, you're obligating yourself to only 4.5 minutes of downtime per month and slightly less than an hour of downtime per year total, that application is not available to all of its user base. So understanding what you can and cannot afford to cover will help drive what SLA level you can target and what hours you can provide that service between. Architecting a solution for scalability and dependable deployment. So how do we put together something that will actually meet the SLA that we've defined? So in order to get to that point, you've really got to kind of define a few requirements for yourself as well. So you've done this SLA development where you've determined what you're going to sell for monitoring. You've determined what SLA you're going to offer that at. The next piece is how do you onboard clients, right? How do you reduce friction? How do you automate? How do you document things? So the first real questions are, how do you onboard a new client? And this is true for whether it's an internal offering. So maybe you're offering this service internally to your lines of business, to your internal departments, or whether you're working as a managed service provider selling this to outside clients. So the first questions is how do you add the client's equipments to your network, to your monitoring system? If you're using Opmantek solutions, your questions are going to be, are you adding those devices to existing polling servers, or will new polling servers be provisioned? So in some deployments, each client gets their own polling server. In others, the polling servers are defined geographically or defined by subnets. Certain servers handle different subnets. Other people who deploy it prefer to have dedicated servers for networking equipment versus servers, etc. So coming up with that concept. How will new devices and services be added? Will an engineer actually go into Opmantek's NMIS, Network Monitoring Information System, and add devices manually? Will they be imported from a spreadsheet? Do you want to create some kind of a live connection to a CMDB? Will you use Opmantek's Open Audit product to do device discovery and auditing, and then pass devices over to NMIS? Will you interconnect with something like ServiceNow that might be doing device discovery, or just be a kind of a central provisioning piece for all the equipment in the offering, and then you're going to pull devices from that and add. So understanding where the devices are going to come from, and finally determining if you're going to be charging the service back to the client, and that doesn't matter. Obviously, if you're a managed service provider, yes, you're charging your client, but if you're offering this internally to your lines of business, to your internal customers, is there some kind of a chargeback? And it's not really the question of is there a chargeback? It's if there's a chargeback, what is the price? So it's understanding what the cost is out in the marketplace, and then also understanding what your costs are related to that. And we cover that in how to determine that in another seminar that's available on our website as well, that you can sign up for and take a look at. Finally, once you've figured out those kind of three big pieces for how you're going to handle client onboarding, the next question is, for each client, there's a series of steps that you have to take. So it's in talking to the client and identifying what applications are key to their line of business. I'll have this conversation with clients, and they'll often come up and say, oh, well, Microsoft 365 is absolutely critical to my business. And the question is, well, is it really? I mean, If you lost it for an hour, how much productivity is lost? And so for some clients, let's say a law office that might use Microsoft 365 to write all of their legal documents and also perhaps store all of their discovery documentation, having Microsoft 365 is absolutely critical. Without it, they're out of business. Whereas having Microsoft 365 available, which might be kind of an ancillary side product, Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc., may not be crippling, but wouldn't necessarily be income impacting. So it's understanding what applications are key to their line of business, understanding what services and SLA per application, right? So some applications might only need to be up Monday through Friday for business hours, but there may be other applications that must be up 24/7, 365. And so understanding what their needs are and then determining if those needs are actually valid, right? And finally, the last thing that you need to do, and this is not only per client, but per application that each client wants you to monitor, what types of synthetic transactions will the application support? And that's really only for gold level, right? But if the client wants a gold level service package and they want 24/7, you've got to be able to determine, can you run some synthetic transactions to make sure that application's up and running? And also, if the client is multi-sited, maybe they have offices on the East Coast, on the West Coast, and they have different servers in different locations, you may want to have user experience monitors in different office locations able to log into the application, because it may work fine for East Coast users, but for some reason, West Coast users can't access the application, and you want to know that first before they start burning down the phone lines telling you that they can't get into the application. So architecting the solution. So we're going to talk about a few different products here. We're going to talk about Opmantek's NMIS, Network Monitoring Information System. That's the core performance and fault monitoring solution. It's at the very center of the wheel on the right-hand side of your screen in the big round green circle. And then bolting into that, like spokes on a wheel, you have Opmantek's commercial solutions, which include OPHA, which allows you to scale horizontally and vertically. So an individual NMIS server can support somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 devices, depending on the total number of interfaces being monitored. At some point, you're going to hit a maximum number of devices, and you'll want to spin up a second server. Well, if you don't want to have to manage individual servers, if you want to just have one master server to look at that rolls the results of 2, 4, 10, 15, 20 NMIS servers up, you're going to want to look at OPHA. We're also going to touch on OP charts, which gives us the ability to create really, really targeted dashboards for your staff internally, but also as a customer portal, right? That OP charts will address that concept of self-service. And we're going to touch on OP trend, which gives you predictive trend analytics, the concept that you can move away from static trending or thresholding and alarms and move to more of a trended alarm model. So equipment sizing, I mentioned that an individual NMIS server can support about 3,000 to 5,000 devices. That's on anywhere from 6 to 8 virtual CPUs and 16 to 24 gigs of RAM. Total storage is really going to be driven by the total number of interfaces you're collecting, but also more importantly, how often you're doing those collections and how long you want to keep the raw collected data for. That's all completely configurable inside NMIS, so you can make those decisions yourself. We have some tools that can help you out as well. So the concept of what OPHA brings you. So rather than just thinking about an individual NMIS server, think about the concept of having multiple servers out there collecting information for you. And that can be as many as you want, right? So you can have as many more servers as you need out there. We're just showing three polling or collection servers out in the field. Each of those connect back up to one or more master units. Now we're showing 3 in this. That's really overkill in some cases. We might recommend, for example, one primary master that all of your staff access, all the NOC team use, maybe a backup master as part of your DNR that's up and running in a hot standby all the time, and then perhaps a portal server that's set up for your end users, your clients, to be able to log in and get access to their dashboards and their user experience and understand how their applications individually are performing. A little bit of detail about how that polar master concept works. So the polar at the bottom half of this, the master at the top half, the concept being that the devices that are being monitored by a combination of NMIS, potentially OP events as well, OP config if you want to do configuration and compliance. Data from NMIS is shared with OPHA, and from OPHA goes from OPHA on the polar to OPHA on the master. And that's completely configurable as far as whether it's a push or a pull or both. Generally speaking, we prefer scheduling pulls on the master. That way everything's centralized. Each master can have its own schedule to pull from the pollers on whatever schedule you want. But it shouldn't pull necessarily more often than the poller is polling. So if the poller is set to poll its devices once every 5 minutes, the master should only pull information from the poller once every 5 minutes. It doesn't make any sense to keep pulling the same information for the same window of time. Handling overlapping IP addresses and multi-tenancy. The nice piece of information here is that NMIS with OPHA handles overlapping IP addresses and multi-tenancy natively. So we do have the concept of multi-tenancy built into NMIS. However, once you add OPHA and the concept that each polling server can handle its own LAN, its own IP address areas of responsibility, then you reduce that concept of overlapping IP addresses. Again, we come back to the concept here that each poller can handle its own LAN or its own set of subnets, its own geographic area, its own geographic region, etc., or its own customer base. And finally, consolidating solutions into a single pane of glass. So now that we've gone over the concept of what services your NOC Center will provide, what SLAs they'll offer for those services, how you'll onboard your clients, how you'll collect the information you need in order to add those devices and those applications into the system. We've talked about the concept of how you architect your solution, how you scale it up, some of the different decision-making criteria that you might have for adding devices or adding additional polling servers. The final piece is how do you interact with the solution? So consolidating solutions into a single pane of glass. Really what you're looking at is the concept that a single pane of glass brings in multiple disparate sources of data together to gain actual insight, right? So for example, not only do you have performance information, but you might have fault or events. You might have configuration change information. You might have charts and graphs and maps and geographic maps and topological maps. All of these different things organized in ways that are purposeful for the user. So some of the reasons or benefits rather for using a single pane of glass, the concept or the peer piece really is increased visibility. It's the idea that everyone gets to see everything, and yet you can control the experience that they have. So the call center person who's answering the phone and taking on inbound help desk calls and questions can quickly use a series of purpose-built pointed dashboards to see how different applications are working and be able to answer questions very, very quickly, whereas the engineer can do more of a deep dive, have a broader, more in-depth look into the engineering piece, and management might have more of a long-term trending approach to what's happening. It's also talks about the idea of reduced operational complexity. You don't have to log in, log out, switch to different products, look at different things, have multiple windows open. I was at one engineering site the other week where each person in the engineering team had 6 monitors on their desk. It was 3 across the desk and then 3 mounted above that at an angle. And it was just so that they could have all of these different products open and monitoring them all. And every single engineer had this. And that was determined as something that was efficient for them based on the number of products they had in place. So how do you get to a single pane of glass? So our recommendation is Opmantek's OP Charts solution. So OP Charts pulls in information from NMIS. So it pulls in your performance information. It pulls in your thresholding information. It pulls in your events from OP Events. It pulls in your configuration change notifications from OP Config. It allows you to lay information out in geographic maps. So you can do Google Maps, you can do topological maps, show logical interconnectivity, both layer 2 and layer 3 information. You can do network maps where you can add a background image, then overlay devices on it, and your interface speeds and your notes and links to other maps, etc. It provides dashboards for service status, interface, top end, different types of charting, etc. So you can use this not only to create single panes of glass for your own staff, and very pointed ones, right? For your call center team can have a series of their own dashboards. Your tier 1 people, your application server, network team, your architecture team, etc., can each have their own series of custom dashboards that they can create, they can manage, they can share all on their own. On top of that, you can also use OP Charts to create customer portals for your end user. Right, that's however you define them. They could be, internal lines of business. They could be internal departments, or they could be external customers. I know it's been a whirlwind presentation for today, but the concepts are straightforward. They're well defined. They're also well documented on the Opmantek Wiki website as well. If you have questions at all, you can certainly reach out to me. My name is Mark Henry. My cell phone number and my email address is on the screen. Feel free to reach out with any questions that you might have. We are going to stop the recording now, and I'm going to turn off everyone's mute control. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask, or of course you can type them in the questions window if you don't have a microphone.